Hello everyone, I'm Amanda Brock and I'm part of the PROSE project team. I'm a lawyer and I'm helping PROSE in shaping the legal input into our documentation and the work we're doing around open source for ICT companies and consortiums. So I'm also a director in a law firm. I'm based out of London and work with technology companies internationally. My main area of work is around open source, and that's come from spending 5 years with an organisation called Canonical. I don't know whether Canonical will be familiar to all of you. It's probably the biggest company in the UK which does open source work, and it supports and operates the online operating system and platform Ubuntu, which many of you will be familiar with. I joined them in 2008 and spent 5 years setting up the legal department and shaping the direction which that was going. When I joined Canonical, I hadn't worked in open source previously, so although I was an IT and tech lawyer, I was on quite a steep learning curve getting up to speed with the issues around open source, all sorts of different issues from IP to licensing, and it's that experience in licensing that we're going to focus on a bit today, around the best licenses for projects and how to choose those. So in our work in PROSE, we looked at things like business plans, business strategies, and how to commercialize open source. And one of the key considerations in your business strategy is, of course, working out which FLOSS licenses to use, i.e. which software and licenses under which it's licensed you should choose to utilize, but also, and perhaps most importantly, which FLOSS license would be the most appropriate one for any project being created by a consortium in an ICT situation to look at and to choose for the distribution of their project. So what license? It's worth firstly considering the licenses themselves and analysing the license that you would prefer based on the license's terms. It's also necessary to consider the project and where the project sits, what its goals are, if its goals are to make money over time, if its goals are to fit within a free software ecosystem, and how the commercialization is actually going to happen, what the business model is. Is it going to be completely free software, dual license software? Is it going to be software which is distributed on a freemium model where perhaps there's going to be support services sold, or is there some other way that the license needs to integrate with the finances of the business model? And also it's important to consider where the software will interact with other software and how it will do that, because various licenses have terms which may affect those interactions. So I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to run through some of the key considerations in free and open source licenses. In doing that, I'm assuming very little knowledge. Now, obviously, you're not going to learn enough from me in a couple of minutes to know all about open source and free licenses. However, if you find after today's presentation that you wish to have more information, the PROSE project has a number of deliverables that I'll cover towards the end, and those deliverables provide the information we're covering today in much more detail. The free software is something which has existed for a very long time, and the person in this picture, Richard Stallman, is often regarded as the godfather of free software. Stallman's views on free software were very much motivated by social and political aspirations, and you'll see in this quote here that he was motivated by an idealistic goal: spreading freedom and cooperation. I want to encourage free software to spread, replacing proprietary software that forbids cooperation and thus makes our society better. Very honourable intentions, and the way within licensing that he achieves those intentions is to use a tool that he invented called Copyleft. You can see in this slide the Copyleft logo is a mirror image of the copyright logo. Whilst it has no actual technical legal meaning, it does have a meaning that's come to pass over time from Stallman's invention. It's not enshrined in statute, but it does have a generally accepted meaning. And it's around giving back and ensuring that the software which is modified, utilised under a free software license continues and remains free, even if it's modified or however it's utilised. So that copyleft term, the effect of that term, which is that when you take a piece of code licensed under copyleft and you utilise it by incorporating it into your code, by modifying it and redistribute it, at that point you must give back the changes you have made, and you must license all future code which incorporates the original copyleft code on the same license. This is sometimes referred to as a waterfall or a cascade effect, and copyleft intentionally, on Stallman's part, protects you from yourself. It's not possible to take copyleft code and to decide to proprietarize it. It's not possible to change the license. The goal is to keep the code on the same free basis using this copyleft license term. And perhaps the most famous copyleft license is the GPL. I think GPL v2 is the most widely used free and open source license in the world. Now, there are some concerns, particularly in large companies, around licenses like the GPL and the copyleft effect that it has. And that effect, if you imagine cooking, is a bit like cooking with eggs. So when you have a copyleft license, if you imagine it's a bit like a tortilla here, we're breaking eggs and we're mixing it together, and each egg is a different package, perhaps with a different license. When the eggs are mixed together and baked into a tortilla, they're inseparable. In terms of software, when the software is mixed in this way, combined in this way, you create something which is inseparable, becomes a single work or a derivative work of those original pieces of code. If you, on the other hand, take packages and mix them in a different way, a way in which they will be separable again, they will disconnect, decouple, a bit like frying a couple of eggs in a pan where the two eggs are cooked, but they're not cooked in a way that merges them together, then you have a completely different thing. So using my tortilla analogy, what you end up with is something all mixed up together, which in legal terms would be derivative work. Now obviously the legal meaning is much more complex and difficult to interpret. It's a question of fact and circumstance, and it's different country to country. This is a particular concern under US copyright law. And the reason it matters with free software licensing is that where you have a derivative work, the copyleft is held to have what's sometimes called a viral effect. Now that term is one that's often disliked by people in the free software world, but that effect is that when you mix everything together and create a derivative work, the copyleft license will work in such a way that a strong copyleft license like GPL can then be deemed to apply to all of the code. There may be an obligation to distribute all of the code that's mixed into this derivative work under the copyleft license. And you can see how that could be a concern to anybody with strong proprietary code which has been mixed with copyleft. Now there are generally practical technical solutions which stop this being a problem and allow you to fry the eggs separately, but you have to think about that. And if you want your code to be used by certain companies, you have to think about the effect that copyleft will have and whether or not that's going to be an issue for them. Now, I've spoken very, very briefly about free software and Richard Stallman. It's a topic that could be a whole session on itself. The open source initiative, it came along maybe 10 years after Stallman's Free Software and Free Software Foundation and GNU. And it had a slightly different slant on life with an ideology that was more commercial and practically focused, and in some ways it could be seen to be a reaction to copyleft. And the OSI differed initially by being keen on permissive licensing, which allowed perhaps freer distribution, where when code is distributed under a permissive license, there are fewer restrictions and terms. With both, you're likely to be required to attribute and put a copyright notice in place. You may also be required not to attribute to an author anything you've changed within a work. But the copyleft provision and the requirement to keep the software under the same license, it just doesn't exist in the same way in permissive licensing. And it may be possible to change the license. There may be a weak copyleft provision with something such as Apache, where you're required to keep the original code on the original license, but your changes and modifications and additions can be licensed freely under a different license. So for some projects, a permissive license or a weak copyleft license are going to be much more suitable. And an example of a very popular permissive license is the BSD license. Very short, very simple. This is the whole license here. So both organisations, Richard Stallman's Free Software Foundation and the OSI, approve licenses. And to be approved, you go through a process where you have to meet conditions. FSF is 4, OSI is 10. They aren't particularly different. Generally, the OSI is a bit more expansive because it has fewer restrictions on the licenses, but there aren't many licenses which are approved by one organisation and not the other. Now, something we haven't gone into in any depth in the PROSE project is patents. Our documentation gives a nodding reference to them and a little bit of information, but it's a current controversial area that is fraught with difficulties and which has really a need for a whole paper on its own. So what we have referenced is the Open Invention Network, which is an organisation that offers licenses for free on the basis of patent non-aggression, and where all the licensees agree not to assert patents they have which read on a Linux definition in order to promote patent non-aggression. You should also be aware that some of the licenses have an express patent license, so if the consortium or organisation owns patents which are part and parcel of the code, there may well be a license in the free and open source software license for the use of those patents. And even perhaps if one is not specifically expressed, you'll find that there may be deemed to be an implied license. So if patents are involved in your project, it's very much worth you taking some time to investigate how they'll be affected and to choose the right license for you. But please do be aware that there may be implied licenses, and it may also be worth you looking at whether there's a benefit to your organisation in becoming part of OIN. So in PROSE, having thought about those issues around licensing, we looked at what our output would be. And I mentioned earlier, I would cover this briefly. We have a handbook which has an executive summary. The handbook also has a license analysis created by another lawyer, not myself, but which is very useful. We've done training such as today through podcasts, and we've also attended a number of conferences and will continue to through to LinuxCon Europe in October, where we can do Q&A sessions as well as presenting. And then the third deliverable we've had, which has had legal input, is, although we're not giving you legal advice, is an app which helps you to choose a license. And we identified the fact that many people in ICT projects were coming to open source for the first time. So we thought it would be useful to have a tool which looked at basics considerations and effectively took you quickly and simply through those. Obviously, it can't take on political, social, organisational opinions and issues that a project may have, but it can very quickly run you through a Q&A which will take you to an end suggestion of a license. So when we decided that we would have this tool, we looked around to see what else was there in the nature of any open source project. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel if there was no need. And we found that GitHub had recently moved towards advising its projects to choose a license, and that there were a number of other license choosing type tools out there. We found that they didn't really fit exactly what we wanted, which was a very simple sort of new entrant level license chooser. And we, in fact, created our own, but we looked to all of these different existing choosers and making our own license chooser. We thought that we would gear it to ICT, we'd gear it to new users, and as far as possible, we would make the app follow a mind map process. So you can see the app at opensourceprojects.eu, and it's been released on Android as well. It's licensed under Creative Commons so that the look and feel and the process can be used that way and improved by other people, and the code itself is licensed in Apache. Now, unfortunately, I wanted to run the app, but I can't do that in Screed. So what I've done is capture some screens. I'm going to very quickly run you through these. Now, this is obviously one set of variables. So the first question it asks you is, have you obtained the right to code? Obviously, a license is a right to use code, and it can only be given by someone who owns that right. You don't necessarily have to own the copyright. You may yourself have a license that allows you to redistribute, but you have to have the rights from somewhere to the code in order to grant a license. So straight away, if you don't have the rights, you can't grant a license, and if you do, then of course you can. And this is us looking at the copyright, whether or not you have a right to give a copyright license. Now, critically for open and free projects, do you want to share a source? And if you say no to that one, I'm afraid we're not going to be able to help you very much. But if you say yes, then a FLOSS license is appropriate and you're in the right app. Should any future distributions be required to use your license choice? Now, this goes back to the points I was making around copyleft. If you say yes, they should, then you do want a copyleft license. And this viral effect wording will be removed in the final app, but we're just canvassing opinion from a number of people as to the way we should express this. If we say no, then we're going to go down the route of permissive licenses. And depending on which one you choose, you'll move on to a different screen. In this instance, we've chosen a permissive license. So for a permissive license, we then have a number of checkboxes that you can decide. Things like whether you want a license that specifies a jurisdiction, are third parties able to charge for the code, that type of thing. Do you wish all mods extensions to under the same license? Takes you through this. This is the equivalent to the checkbox for the copyleft license as opposed to permissive. And here we get to an Apache type license, and you'll see we're still finalizing the content here. And that's us back to the beginning. Now, when you get to the end, you'll find that this is a list of the licenses that are appropriate for our chooser. We've taken the top 10 licenses, and it will select one of these for you, plus a summary of the content, the decisions that you've made as you've worked through our license chooser. I don't know whether you're going to have any questions. You'll see that the app is, the way the screenshots are isn't quite complete. It's much easier to actually use the app itself and run through the demo there and follow the mind maps. When you get to the end and you have a summary and a recommended license, you will also find that if you want to change something, if you don't like the license you've ended up with, or you very rarely end up with no license, then you can go back and change your decisions and get a new summary and a new choice of license. Now, we're at the stage where we're demoing the app. It is publicly available to play with, and we're looking for feedback from people. We hope to have that from the legal community over the next few weeks, and to have something which is truly usable very soon. Now, I don't know how we're going to do this, because I'm happy to answer questions.
I have one question for Amanda. How do you run the questionnaire so anyone can go ahead and run the process that you just explained to us? Anyone it's outside of the project can go ahead and do it? It's like available to everyone in Europe, or it's only restricted to people? For everyone, I can recommend that to use it. If someone asks if I can recommend a company or a project to use it, is that available? That's my question. Thank you.
Maybe I can take this one for Amanda because she's not hearing us. The process that you just saw, the app is both a web application and a mobile application, so you'll be able to run it on your browser, but also on your mobile, either Android and iOS. So you'll be able to run it once we make it publicly available. We are going through the last stages of development just to make sure that it fits everyone. and just follow our website. We'll make a public release in the near future, and it will be a web version and both a mobile version, so you can use a tablet, Android, whichever you prefer.